It is less than 10 days before the start of December, and while most of us are desperate for a festive break, we are not going to get a break from load shedding, it seems. Last week, the power utility confirming major maintenance work starting next month, which will increase the chances of more power cuts. We're currently on stage 4, with Eskom really concerned about running out of diesel. But more than all of that, the economy is going to take a massive hit. So how is this going to affect many businesses that rely on holiday trade to make ends meet? Well, I'm joined now by Happy Khambule, Environment and Energy Manager for Busa, which is Business Unity South Africa. And Happy, you're just back from Egypt, which we're going to chat about in just a moment. But first of all, real concern about the impact of load shedding. We're currently on level 4. We're going to go to level 2, but we've been told to expect a really up and down scenario with lots happening in December for Eskom. How much do you think this is likely to affect particularly small businesses that perhaps rely on the festive season trade?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I think the biggest problem really is that with the erratic nature of load shedding scheduling, what you tend to have is that businesses aren't able to prepare. Obviously, for any business, knowing that load shedding is going to happen, you are fully attuned and aware of the likely schedules, and then you've prepared the necessary, either it's gas or other forms of power that might help you to be able to weather those 2 to 4 hours that you don't have power. But if you have an erratic kind of scheduling, then you are unable to plan your production as well as make sure that customers are given the kind of service that they want and that they need during the festive season, because it's not only a time to relax, but it is also a time to actually enjoy the greater parts of South Africa. And that's going to be a big worry.
Have you got a sense already at Busa of how much load shedding this year, which has just been astonishingly bad, has impacted particularly the more vulnerable, smaller businesses?
Well, we've got aggregate figures of what each level of load shedding kind of gives us in terms of losses in the economy. We've understood that a lot of small businesses have started to close down as the level of stages tends to increase. So there are longer the stages of load shedding in stage 4 as well as in stage 5 or 6. You tend to get businesses which are much smaller, unable to weather the storm, because not only do you have a reduced amount of cash flow, amount of customers coming in, you also aren't able to recoup the amount of losses that you've had in previous months or in previous days. So small businesses are really hampered by the ability of not having the necessary resources as big businesses and the ability to be able to weather the different levels of load shedding. But what we do know on aggregate, that stage 4 about approximately gives us a loss of about 1 billion per day when we've got those kinds of stages.
Stage 4 costs the economy 1 billion a day. And that's the impact on business. That is astonishing, particularly in the tough times that we're in. We know that the private sector is being asked to get on board in helping to generate power. And we know that the big businesses in particular, we see a lot of our malls, most of them have got a backup power plan. Those small businesses that have actually managed to survive to this point, have most of them got a backup power plan?
Yeah, so those that have survived are either, I would say, fortunate enough to be sitting in those areas that are close to national key points, where there is less erratic power supply. But when obviously we move into the stages of 6 and 5, where nobody is protected, you have some businesses that have backup, and obviously companies or businesses that are working in information technology and communication tend to have a level of support or backup that is much greater than those who are in the service industry, such as restaurants and those in tourism. However, those aren't going to work when you have an erratic supply, as I said, especially with the different stages of load shedding, because those things tend to run out, and then the cost of actually running your business starts to increase. And if they increase beyond what you're able to make in that particular month or in that particular day, you start thinking about shutting down.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sad reality. And of course, in this context here in South Africa, this occupies all of us because it impacts all our lives. But you've just returned from Egypt, where the big global concern is what we're going to do about climate change. We've seen big businesses making commitments. But if we look at what's come out of the Egypt summit, yes, for the first time, significantly, there is this commitment to establish a loss and damage fund, which of course is meant to help those developing countries that actually haven't necessarily done anything to worsen carbon emissions, but are feeling the brunt of the climate change. Do you believe that there is a really strong commitment on the part of business to really make a difference? Or are you more on the, oh, this is a bit of greenwashing, which it's called, saying all the right things about getting emissions down, but not really doing enough?
Yeah, well, I think there's always two sides to the story, but to be frank, the loss and damage outcome at COP was a good signal to actually establish the fund. But for countries like South Africa, we're going to be stuck in a situation where we have to prove our vulnerability because we're not the least developed country in the world, right? We're not one of the least developed countries in the world. So as much as there is a loss and damage a fund and there's mechanisms that are there that would apportion whatever support that is there, we still need to prove to a certain extent that we are vulnerable enough. And obviously, South Africa, we know that our vulnerability is quite high, but we are a developing country. So there's still some negotiation as to who's going to be able to access those resources. And on the business side, I think businesses have come in on two fronts. One is at least the financiers have started speaking about a program around underinsuring or underwriting insurance that is linked to disasters as well as the occurrence of specific disasters. And they kind of put that in a broad program called a Shield program, which basically gives you the kind of surety that if a certain incident such as floods happen, you will be covered, as opposed to having to prove that a certain amount of damages have occurred. So in that circumstance, in that case, the private sector is coming to the table. We've already heard that the private sector, even from last year, has already communicated net zero targets to say, look, we have to transition and we are beginning our transition. And this is the ultimate goal, to be net zero by a specific date. Most companies are saying net zero by 2050. And it basically means that companies might be emitting, but they'll be investing just as much money in reducing the emissions that they are producing, as well as trying to suck up those that are stuck in the environment. So we are seeing good signs, but are we doing enough yet? No, we're not, because globally emissions are actually increasing. So we need to start moving in the light of reducing our emissions as much as possible, using the necessary technologies that are available, and ensuring that we undergo a just transition in the midst of that whole move towards greener technologies.
Yeah, so we've got to keep the pressure on so that business does carry on. Though, of course, we know that South Africa received quite a lot of praise for its commitment to a just transition. So let's hope that we can be a bit of an example in years to come. That would be really lovely to see. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That, of course, is Happy Khambule, Environment and Energy Manager for Busa, which is Business Unity South Africa, just talking to us about the real impact these varied stages of load shedding are having on small businesses in particular. It really impacts their bottom line. It's also very difficult if you don't know what to deal with on any given day. It's a really difficult time, particularly as we head into the festive season for small companies reliant on tourism.